Hello everyone, welcome to another collection video, another TV series like South Park that is still an ongoing and semi-popular show that I feel definitely had a heyday long ago and I kind of lost interest over time. Today I'll be looking at The Simpsons. And The Simpsons, of course, is still ongoing. It was just renewed for 2 more seasons. Was it 33 and 34 or 34, 35, somewhere around there. It's been around basically the same length of time that I've been around, as far as going back to the Tracy Ullman show and things. But The Simpsons has an ongoing popular franchise still. If you are younger and weren't around in the 90s, very particularly the early to mid 90s, I can't explain how prevalent The Simpsons was in just everyday life for a period of time in the 90s. It was everywhere. You couldn't go anywhere without finding, Simpsons t-shirts, ice cream, VHS tapes, always on TV, hugely popular, video games at home, arcade games in the arcade, turn on the TV, Butterfinger commercials, everything. The Simpsons was everywhere for a period of time when I was growing up. It was just one of those things that was this massive cultural phenomenon that, it's still an ongoing popular show, but there's nothing compared to those first few years. I'd say right around the time the second season started airing through towards the end of the 90s, there was just this period where it was just peak Simpsons craziness everywhere. And it was something that was just something, it's one of those kind of shows that it seemed like everyone watched. Obviously not everyone watched it, but it was just one of those shows that seemed like it was such a prominent thing that everyone was at least aware, especially with Bart, the way they were pushing him at that point in the 90s, of The Simpsons. And they, it's such a good show. I feel like in the earlier seasons it had a lot of heart. It's still, ridiculous, goofy humor that still works. And it's something that I think is very much of the time as well. I think that part of why I don't like the show anymore might be because it's changed as the times have changed, and I'm much more interested and nostalgic in those first few seasons. But in saying that, I also feel like some of the writing was better in the first few seasons. I particularly like the first 9 years of The Simpsons. I think was the peak for that show. So taking a look at our collection here, that is what I have decided to collect for the show, is the stuff that I will, of course, rewatch over time, stuff to revisit. And it's been fun revisiting some of these episodes because I, of course, watched it as it came out for roughly the first 9 or 10 years, and then random reruns were always airing on Fox, constantly, so catching random episodes here and there. But it's fun going back and seeing some of these episodes for the first time in some of them almost 30 years and being like, wow, I remember every second of this episode, even though I haven't seen it in close to 3 decades for some of these. So it's really cool to do that and realize how many of the episodes that when I hear The Simpsons that I think of occur just in the first few seasons, really. So we have the first season on DVD, continuing on with season 2 and season 3. Season 4. These box sets I really enjoy because they do have decent behind-the-scenes featurettes and commentaries and things. It's definitely fun to revisit. And because the entire series, I believe, is up on Disney+, I only watched a couple episodes and the aspect ratio was off. I don't know if there's an option now or if they fixed that or whatever, but to watch in its original form, like these DVD sets are definitely preferable. Then move on to the 5th season. And now this one, which ends up being my favorite season of the series overall, the complete 6th season. And this is when they first started these head-style collector's editions for a whole bunch of seasons. They did Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie, and I don't remember if they did any more beyond that. Those are the only ones that I've seen many, many times. But this is my favorite season of the show, season 6. This box set, these kind of head ones, they're interesting, but they are not as nice as the normal box. It's not as functional. As you can see, even as I'm picking it up here, it kind of, it falls apart a little bit. It's not quite as stable, just, when you don't have it, you have it on the shelf, it clicks into place, but it's still very, very easily comes apart. the hinge probably over time would eventually snap. It's just not as nice as having the regular additions for those. So I went ahead and eventually was able to get the complete 6th season in that form, which was hard to find because this one, in the future, they would make seasons in both these collector's edition things. They would also release it in the regular thing, whatever. But for season 6, there were far fewer, and at first you had to actually special order when these first came out, the just regular case for season 6. But just taking a look at a few of these episodes here, I get some of the glare. Why it's one of my favorites. Bart of Darkness, Lisa's Rival, another Simpsons clip show. Itchy and Scratchy Land is one of my favorite episodes in the entire show. I just really like that. There are a lot of episodes in this season in particular. Bart vs. Australia, A Star is Burns. They're just every single one here, ending with Who Shot Mr. Burns Part 1. For some reason, this season sticks out in my mind the most. This is the one where I have seen these episodes over and over again over time, and when I think of The Simpsons, a lot of my favorites are packed right into this season. So that's why this ends up being one of my favorites. I really love season 6. And speaking of Who Shot Mr. Burns, we have the one Simpsons VHS tape that we own, which is Who Shot Mr. Burns Part 1 and 2. I never really collected The Simpsons on VHS just because, again, it was on all the time. You couldn't help certain times of day just turning on the TV and there'd just be Simpsons reruns constantly, every single weekday. So I never bothered with collecting it on VHS. That is one thing that stuck out for me, though, when I happened to find this at a thrift store, was Mr. Burns, Who Shot Mr. Burns 1 and 2, because I just remember that standing out as such an interesting idea because I wasn't used to this type of show, this style of show, doing that kind of, two-parter and mystery. Obviously, that concept, was very familiar, but I just remember as a kid that standing out because I didn't expect that from The Simpsons in a weird way. And just at the time, it was just such a fascinating thing because it was kind of a water cooler moment for the show. Moving on to season 7, season 8. The only other one of the head ones, and I haven't bothered to get a regular edition because it's a season that I enjoy, but not necessarily one of my favorites. Kind of the end for me for The Simpsons is the complete 9th season with Lisa's Head. And for me, that's kind of where The Simpsons stops being interesting to me. I watched, in the original run, I watched through, I think, season 10, maybe part of season 11, and while there were some enjoyable episodes, it just wasn't quite the same caliber as the earlier seasons. And for me, the ones that stick with me the most and have, I think, the best writing and just resonate the most with me are really seasons 1 through 6. And then most episodes of 7 and 8, and the majority of 9. And then that's about it. After then, I just don't really have any interest in The Simpsons. I kind of stopped watching it. I don't think I've seen an episode of The Simpsons in over a decade at this point. So this is really just, for me, this was the heyday of The Simpsons, of the Simpsons craze, and I think The Simpsons was at its best at that point. And one of the things that The Simpsons always stood out with for me, aside from obviously the Treehouse of Horrors, definitely the Halloween specials, those were really well done and very, very popular. But one thing that also always stood out to me were the Christmas episodes. So I did this one DVD collection. They released a bunch of these, different themed episodes. And I always enjoyed the Christmas one, Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire, the very first episode, and it's still, I think, one of the best they've done. Mr. Plow, She of Little Faith, Grift of the Magi, and Miracle on Evergreen Terrace is also really good. There's so many, there are other ones as well that were really good over the years, but the Christmas specials just always stood out to me. I think they were done really well. And then, just kind of to top it off, never really thought this was that great, but because it was a unique instance for The Simpsons, definitely one I wanted to keep and have in the collection, is the Simpsons movie, which is just kind of an overly long, okay episode of the show. The Simpsons just didn't lend itself well to a movie. It didn't really need it, and they haven't done another one since because it wasn't really necessary. It's okay, but it really is just kind of a half decent episode of the show stretched out, maybe like a half decent two-parter kind of thing. So it was an okay movie, but again, just wasn't quite as interesting as these earlier seasons. So earlier Simpsons I really loved, and part of it too is it was so engrossed in the pop culture of the time when I was growing up. So many celebrity cameos and pop culture references of the time when I was a kid, so of course I'm going to have a fondness for that. One of the things is I have the Simpsons Xena, or the Simpsons Lucy Lawless, because she's flying, and I remember the episode, she's flying, she has, Bart and Lisa, and they say, wait a minute, Xena can't fly, just because I'm not Xena, I'm Lucy Lawless. And Lucy Lawless is just fantastic, and always seems to have a great sense of humor and is a good sport about things, and of course loved Xena, one of my favorite shows of the 90s growing up, so that was really cool, and I've always kind of remembered that episode and her cameo there. So that is a look at my collection for The Simpsons, and just another one of those shows from my formative years that I really enjoyed during that time frame and just kind of fell out of interest with it over time. I'd love to hear what your memories are of The Simpsons and what some of your favorite seasons are.